welcome to Australia in Space TV. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the editor with the Australia in Space magazine. Today we're crossing to the University of New South Wales in Sydney, and I'm joined by Professor Andrew Dempster, Director of the Australian Centre for Space Engineering Research. Great to have you back, Andrew. And also a special guest, Assistant Professor Dr. Kevin Cannon, Geology and Geological Engineering, the Colorado School of Mines, and Professor Serkan Saydam, and Chair of Mining Engineering, School of Minerals and Energy Resources Engineering with the University of New South Wales. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us on Australia in Space TV.
Good morning.
Andrew, you are leading up to the Off-Earth Mining Forum over in Western Australia later this month, the future of resource extraction. And obviously with Kevin sitting next to you, Geology and Geological Engineering, he's giving a lecture today with the University of New South Wales. Maybe just introduce us to the forum and then we'll dive in to the session that you're having today.
Right, well, Serkan and I have been running the Off-Earth Mining Forum since 2013. This is the 6th time we run it. Generally, we run it every 2 years, but we're breaking that pattern this year. Rather than just run it every 2 years on the East Coast, we've decided to go to Perth and engage directly with the mining industry there. Part of what we're trying to achieve is to get the mining industry more interested in space and the benefits that space technologies and thinking about problems in the way that aerospace and space engineers think about problems, how that could be applied to solve problems that the mining sector faces.
Do you find moving to Western Australia this particular year is to get closer to industry and to sort of share that sort of research and space technology a bit more on the ground, so to speak?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we've always had a very practical, applied focus to what we're looking at with the space resources. But in particular, we're looking at the companies that are based in Perth. So there's a number of those. Many of those are in the AROSE consortium. And what we're trying to do more directly this time is to speak the language of the miners in the forum, rather than have the two industries sort of equally represented.
And Serkan, I suppose from your perspective, you're the chair of mining engineering. It's not that the mining sector and the resources sector doesn't understand sort of this technology in this domain. I take a process of continual learning and development. Where do you find the industry and academia are at the moment in relation to this domain?
Yeah, I mean, so actually looking at a bit more broader approach. So mining industry and space industry have a lot of commonalities. We both operate in extreme environments, and we're dealing with the excessive risks and high capital cost operations. So that's why it's a big synergy, and we got opportunities to collaborate and learn from each other. So, I mean, space industry developed a lot of spin-off technologies which are used by mining industry. For example, GPS, telecommunications, or like laser spectroscopy sort of technologies, and many more you can add. And I'm sure Andrew will touch that systems engineering approach started being used by the mining industry. And mining industry can also give, provide some expertise for the space mining, future space mining operations, such as we know how to extract minerals and process them. We are very working on very highly regulated, the industry. So we can definitely pass that information to space industry to achieve sustainable off-Earth mining operations of the future. So in our approach is actually establishing Australia's leadership in in-situ resource utilization, or Europeans call space resources utilization, which using space resources in space. But we always pass that message that we want to reduce the potential risks of off-Earth mining operations. That's why we doing under AXER umbrella, we're doing we're doing a research topics that attracts PhD, high caliber PhD students. We have more than 10 students. And also we're establishing new courses related to space resources. We can talk about this later.
Well, I spoke to Michelle Keegan from Arose recently, and I asked her the question of who's learning more from each other, do you think, resources and mining versus space? Or do you think it coming together creates a whole new way of thinking? Do you find there's a lean towards who's learning more from each other? Maybe for you, Andrew?
Well, part of the education process that we have pursued over the years has been more along the lines of getting the space industry people to understand how the mining industry goes about designing projects and so on. So the way that, as Serkan pointed out, to an outsider, these industries look very similar. The quantum of money required to make the projects work and the timescales that they work over, those sorts of things are very, very similar. But the way that a project life cycle works in the two industries are quite different. And the approach that we've always taken, or almost the motivating thing for our research here, has been what we're trying to do is to reduce the risk perceived by an investor in the space resources company, say. Now, the problem we've been addressing traditionally has been that the space people do not understand the way that the miners approach their operations. And what we need to do is change the way that the space industry thinks. That's different to what we're trying to do in Perth. We're trying to bring the miners along. We're saying, look, this is the way the space people go about it. You can learn new ways of doing things, particularly or specifically one of the things we're looking at is the system engineering approach. But I think both sides can benefit greatly with greater engagement, but the will to engage is probably where we're operating at the moment. Our most important imperative is to really get the two sides talking to each other more and better.
Well, I think that's where a good segue to bring Kevin in. Dr. Kevin Cannon, Assistant Professor, Geology and Geological Engineering at the Colorado School of Mines. How much engagement do you see in the US in this regard as well, and the space and resources sector talking to each other? Yeah, just nationally in the US, how much engagement do you see?
Yeah, I would say it's quite limited. So we hold the Space Resources Roundtable every year. That's kind of the equivalent to the Offers Mining Forum. And we'll get some representatives from companies, but they tend to they'll sit in the back of the room. They'll be pretty quiet. Some of them are not there officially on behalf of their companies. They're kind of taking some time off to be there. So we've not seen kind of a full-throated endorsement. We haven't seen them jumping in with a lot of capital or with projects. I think they're interested, but the sense is that they're waiting for more assurance. Things about the regulatory risks, and so they're sitting on the sidelines. They're interested, they're engaged, but they haven't really made the leap to fully embrace this at this point.
Well, I suppose you're giving a talk today, the moon's most enigmatic resource. How do you see the opportunities in space for the mining sector? Do you think they get it, or do they think it's a bit too far flung away at the moment?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to have the demand for products. So you have to have a willing customer who's willing to buy these resources. And what we are always trying to get across is that space resources, for the most part, is not about bringing stuff back to Earth to sell into the existing commodities markets. It's about supporting an expansion into space, a cislunar economy. So I think the moon is the closest object that we'll be mining. That's probably where we'll start. And in terms of the resources there, a lot of them are based just around the soil or the regolith that kind of covers the entire moon. So there's a lot of interest in pulling oxygen out of that regolith to sell as rocket propellant in space. And then specifically what I'm going to be talking about today is the water ice that's believed to exist in these permanently shadowed craters at the poles of the moon. And at the South Pole in particular, that's the site of attention for the Artemis program. It's being led by NASA and international partners. There's also interest from China and others. So everyone's kind of converging on the South Pole, and there's a lot of questions about how much ice there is and where is it. So that's what I'll be talking about today.
I suppose an open question to each of you is, and I was at a talk the other night where the exploration to Mars and Moon is capitalist driven. Do you think that's where, and if you agree, that's where we need the mining and resources sector to get involved? They understand the business that's going to be required on these terrestrial bodies, and but they've also got the capital to assist. Where do you see this actually heading, and what's the potential business case? As Kevin just pointed out, sounds like a lot of opportunity, but what's the volume versus cost here?
Perhaps I start, Andrew. I'm sure you can add what I say. Look, investing in space is a big thing, but people may not know that startups can soon change the game. So if you look at that, according to Goldman Sachs' recent report, and investing in space is no longer restricted to governments or ultra-wealthy people. So looking at since 2000, about $10 billion has been invested in new space startups. And looking at between 2000 to 2005 was 8. Between 2012 to 2020 was more than 100 private investments. So that shows how rapid commercializations could improve what we're talking about here.
And Andrew, maybe just what you
perceive in this area. Just to pick up on that, Australia has only had a space agency since 2017. We're a fairly young country in terms of our space sector, but the nature of the sector here is very heavily weighted towards startups, and the success rate of those startups is greater than the startups in the space industry have a higher success rate than other startups for some reason. We have, per head of population, we have the most space startups in the world, for instance. But that's partly due to absences. The big prime companies only have sort of small offices here. They're not heavily invested. And those medium-sized companies have not grown from startup size. So in a way it makes sense, but that's the nature of our business here. And a number of companies in Australia are looking to join this sector in all sorts of different ways. And those startups we have showcased at the Off-Earth Mining Forum in the past. But to come back to your actual question, so the risks, when you're talking about companies investing in this area, there are all sorts of risks. I mean, Kevin alluded to the regulatory risk. There are international legal instruments in place. There's the Moon Agreement and there's the Artemis Accords. Australia is the only country in the world that is a signatory to both. We have not had an explanation from the Australian Space Agency about how those two nominally conflicting instruments can be signed by the same country. And whether the Artemis Accord is going to hold up under international law because they're bilateral rather than multilateral, there's all that sort of regulatory questions. The business cases, do they hold up? We've had PhD students doing quite a lot of work on various different ways that you might structure business cases. But all of these things, when you take them to a mining company, none of that communicates with them in a way that would allow them to take the decision or make the decision to take the risks. And so there's still that gap where we're sitting. And I think it's incumbent on people like us to make sure that we do provide or come up with solutions to this problem of communication. It's the example I give is that one of the guys from Rio who attended the Space Resources Week in Luxembourg in 2019 spent the whole week there, listened to many presentations, mainly by space-oriented people, and his conclusion was, there's not a single thing I've heard this week that I can take back to my board. So that's the fundamental problem we're trying to deal with.
But just to follow up, because what Andrew said, that between 2019 and now, there is a big change. So the push for achieving net zero emissions in Australia by signing of COP27, that might change, because it's a very big benefit of really doing mining business with achieving this net zero can go through the technological improvements. That's what I'm trying to do anyway. So that might change. So I believe this Off-Earth Mining West Forum could have a lot of attention from the mining industry because of that, because we need to apply more technology to achieve net zero. That could be the first interaction between the mining industry and space industries, and then that will follow up to potential future operations on the moon or Mars, helping to colonization.
And Kevin, I'll invite you there. Any thoughts on this in terms of the business case and how you perceive industry need, the information that the industry needs?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd add maybe from the US side is that there's still a big question of what role the government is going to play. So some people really want the government to step in and be an anchor tenant, an anchor customer, to send out a demand signal, right, for NASA to say, we want X amount of oxygen delivered at the pole of the moon. There's also there's also SpaceX. They have the Starship rocket that we saw the test earlier this year. Once that gets operational, the idea is to refuel that in low Earth orbit. So they have aspirations for the moon as well. So there's we can anticipate or calculate what the demand might be, but again, we're waiting for them to actually put out that signal to say, we will take delivery of these propellants. So I think that's a question: is how much of this can just be grassroots, venture capital, or how much role does the government have to play in establishing these kinds of industries in space?
And SpaceX is a good example of a commercial enterprise that had the anchor tenant at the beginning, which was the government, and had then gone on with it.
Well, my first thought is obviously with the recent decisions being made in Australia, that sort of anchor industry funding that was potentially there is no longer there, and we're yet to see what the impact is. But look, I prefer to keep the audience.
Go, Andrew. Okay, look, I first joined a space company back in 1988. So I've been observing this industry for a long time. The Australian space industry has had a lot of ups and downs. The recent decision by Ed Husick to defund the Earth observation satellite and not replace it with anything else, apart from being an irresponsible decision by him, is not the worst thing that has happened to the space industry in the time that I've been observing it. We have ups and downs. This is a down. There'll be ups. So I don't think people should get too discouraged about what's happening right now. I think we have better days ahead. And a lot of those startups I mentioned earlier are thriving regardless of anything the government's doing.
Well, look, as I was saying, I think we'll want the audience wanting more. It's in Perth. The program is looking very good. It's on Eventbrite. We'll have the link in the show notes, obviously, but it's the Off-Earth Mining Forum West, the Future of Resource Extraction, and that is on the 22nd of August. That's just next week. It's an all-day event at the Deloitte Perth offices there. But thank you very much, gents, for joining us today. We've had Professor Serkan Saydam and Chair of Mining Engineering, School of Minerals and Engineering Resources Engineering, New South Wales, University of New South Wales. Naturally, I've got to read these. Assistant Professor Dr. Kevin Cannon, Geology and Geological Engineering with the Colorado School of Mines, visiting from the US. Welcome to Australia, Kevin, and enjoy your time. And Professor Andrew Dempster, once again, Director, Australian Centre for Space Engineering Research, or the ACSER at the University of New South Wales. Gents, thank you very much for joining us today on Australia in Space TV.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the opportunity.